The scariest night of my entire life was a close encounter with a, later confirmed, murderer when I was camping with my boyfriend in the mountains. It ended with us running for our lives down the mountain in the pitch black, clutching knives and a hammer for self-protection. It was the end of 2018, our first getaway together as a couple. We went to the Appalachian Trail in Virginia. We were naive. We thought it would be more romantic to camp out as far off the beaten track as possible. We walked really far into the wilderness and got to a spot where nobody passed us all afternoon. We were making s'mores over the campfire after it had just got dark. It was twilight. All of a sudden, my boyfriend, who has 20/20 vision, saw a man approaching us slowly. He was creeping up on his. At first, we thought it was a park ranger coming to tell us to put out our campfire. I began to hide the weed, thinking this was our biggest concern. My boyfriend called out to him, "Hey, can I help you?" We thought it was weird that he didn't have any kind of light on him. He didn't have any camping bag. Nothing for camping. Why was he out here so far with no camping gear at night? With no light? He sped up after my boyfriend called out and came right at him. He had this strange look in his eyes. The look was absent, blank, and weird. He didn't answer my boyfriend, he just kept walking right at him. Red flags going off at this point. When my boyfriend realized it wasn't a park ranger, he quickly put his hand in his pocket where he had a concealed knife. He made it clear he had a weapon. It was only after my boyfriend did this that the guy acknowledged us. He said something weird, "Oh, I was just wondering if we all were having a party." Remember, we were miles away from a single soul, and it was beginning to get dark when he began to approach us slowly without a flashlight. He had no camping gear with him, just a tiny drawstring bag on his back. After he asked what we were doing, we didn't give him any answers but asked him what was going on. He didn't answer. We just looked past my boyfriend towards the site. It was windy, so we had put up a tarp to shield ourselves. This also meant that the guy approaching couldn't see how many people were at our site. He asked, "How many people have you got with you?" He began to circle our site to check us out. He asked again if we had any other people with us, and my boyfriend didn't answer. He carried on circling around our camp. Now, bear in mind, we had set up our camp on this crazy steep hill. It was the only spot for miles that was possible to put a camp. However, he told us that he was going to set up camp nearby. He proceeded to walk off in a direction straight up the hill. We knew for a fact he couldn't put a campsite there because of the terrain. Remember, he had no light, and no bag with camp gear. Nothing. We were silent. We listened to his footsteps on the leaves as he walked up the hill in this direction completely off the path. He walked for about 30 seconds and then his footsteps stopped completely. He was just still. Silent. We knew he was still there, but we couldn't see him. It was dark. At this point I was freaking out. I didn't want to seem like a pussy in front of my boyfriend. We had a talk about whether we needed to leave. My boyfriend handed me a knife and said if anything happens to him, I should run. At this point, I knew it wasn't just me freaking out unnecessarily. He said we needed to get out of there and to just grab essential items. I was scared that he was about to shoot us dead. Later on when I told my boyfriend this, he said no, this is the type of guy who would probably prefer to stab his victims to death. We began to walk, run, down the trail in the pitch black with our lights off. For at least a mile. My boyfriend looked back to see him staring at one point. He ran behind me to protect me. This experience stuck with me. I still can't think of a rational or non-menacing reason why that guy was there that night. I've tried. Now this was at the end of 2018, but my boyfriend, now husband, and I were remembering it last night. I decided to type into Google if there had been any murders in the same place around the same time. There was. A few months after our incident on the same trail, an unhinged man with crazy eyes approached some hikers at twilight as it was getting dark. He behaved in a deranged and aggressive manner, before stabbing a man to death with a 17-inch knife. A woman he was with ran for her life down the trail. Finally, she raised her hands in surrender and he began to stab her. Somehow, she managed to get away. The killer carried on wandering the trail, and shouted out to other campers to give him a flashlight. They didn't, thank goodness. All of these detailed are the same as the guy who approached us. Same age, same deranged eyes, same lack of flashlight, same time to approach us, twilight, same look, same place. The more articles I read, the more I realized this psychopath had been roaming the trails harassing hikers for a while. A few different people had reported him. Not just us. Apparently this erratic and violent psychopath was well known to law enforcement along the Appalachian Trail. His name is James Sovereign Jordan. My friends and I have a podcast where we tell scary stories. This is one that is infamous in my family and that I grew up hearing and telling. Back in the 80s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, and when she would drive long distances back and forth between her parents and my uncle's to visit. It was a transitional period for them. He had just graduated and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive across several states, through the desert, which took her hours. This desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone a gas station. So Aunt Kay set out and began one of these journeys. A couple hours into the drive, Aunt Kay noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed as she continued to sing along to Les Miserables until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into her rearview mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with her car. The second she began to pull off the road, she said she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again, stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling, but a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through Aunt Kay's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Heart pumping, Aunt Kay silently asked herself what the hell was that, as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flash their brights and motion to her to pull over. Fear and confusion set in as Aunt Kay began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones, but she pressed on. Just as her resolve wavered, she started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. She started slowing back down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane and came level to my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of her stomach and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary, greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple teeth in his smile that she'll never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thoughts she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down, he slowed down. She sped up, he sped up. It got to the point that he began to try to push her car off the road. Aunt Kay was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone, out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aunt Kay sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close or even get in between those trucks she would be safe, so she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down, and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years. My aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mum of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020, and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with a family, and he'd wait. Another car with a male driver would go by and he'd wait, but every so often a car would go by with a pretty woman driving alone. So I'd pull out behind and follow 'em. I'd flash my brights, honk and motion for 'em to pull over. Aunt Kay, paralyzed, continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, I'd tell 'em to pop the hood and I'd be able to tell 'em what was wrong with their car. They would, and I'd yank a couple wires. When the car wouldn't start, I'd tell 'em no problems, my buddy has a shop in the next town. I can give you a ride and he'll give you a fair deal. My aunt slowly moved to the living room. They'd get in, and I'd rape and kill them. Bury 'em anywhere in the desert. When asked how many times he did this, he responded, "They'll never find all the bodies. I can't even count, and how many got away? 2 or 3. My aunt stood alone staring into the same toothless grin she saw on that highway that day. It was Henry Lee Lucas. Thanks, Charlie. DLDR, my aunt narrowly avoided being killed by a famous serial killer,